the other day, and I was kind of shocked. It's kind of, I mean, I'm driving up Fifth Street, where I see the mint, right, the old mint, and it's looking pretty good. But the alley by the mint, where I used to have some offices, didn't look the same. The entire street didn't look the same. Well, that Nordstrom's closing, and that the mall's going away, and I'm just wondering what's going to happen to San Francisco. I mean, I'm concerned as a native son. And then, coming up in August, I'm doing this show, Emil Amok, lost NPR host found in San Francisco. I mean, it's the San Francisco version of the show that I did in New York in February. And I didn't want to get out of my car. I'm just driving around, over there by where the Hilton Hotel, which I think is going to be sold. Certainly the Park 55, that hotel, which is a Hilton property, they're giving that up. And those used to be the kind of, just like the mall was an anchor where the Nordstrom was, the Westfield Mall. The Hiltons, Park 55 and the actual Union Square Hilton, they used to be the anchors of sanity down there downtown, which used to go crazy around, well, still is, around Civic Center, 8th and Market, and it's trickled down, and now 5th is like, forget it, the Tenderloin has taken over. And I'm doing a show, this Emil Amok lost NPR host, at 277 Taylor Street, which is right across from kind of kitty corner from Glide Memorial Church. And the theater right now is shut down. I mean, it's going to be revived in August. And I hope they're going to clean it up because it is a sanctuary for the homeless. It's almost kind of scary. And I was looking for 277 Taylor, and I think I saw it. It looks like it's a decent, well, I don't know what it looks like on the inside, but on the outside, it was an encampment. So I just hope that it will be ready. And of course, look, I'm a San Franciscan. I'm a trooper. I don't live there now. I'm a San Franciscan in exile. But I root for my town. I root for my city. Native son here, right? I hope by Saturday, August 12th at 7 p.m., my opening night, it's going to be ready. I hope that by Thursday, the 17th, 8:30 p.m. Now, Thursday night at 8:30 p.m., that could be tough to get people on a Thursday night to go down to the they got to clean it up. And then Saturday, this may be the safe show, Saturday the 19th at 1 p.m., because it's daylight and, most of the homeless people are sleeping. And, they won't bother you during the day, I think. I don't know. I just know that it just struck me as, I'm sure the people who are running the San Francisco Fringe Festival will have it all straightened out. I'll be there, and I'll be doing my show. Like I said, Saturday, August 12th, 7 p.m., Thursday, the 17th at 8:30 p.m., Saturday, the 19th at 1 p.m. It's going to be fun. I've been working with I've been sort of like working with a committee of folks about the show. I'm working on the structure. It's going to be a different show than the one I did in New York somewhat. It's going to be more San Francisco oriented. Certainly it's going to be Filipino enough and NPR enough and Harvard enough and all that. Emil Amok lost NPR host. Check out my website at amok.com for details on how to get tickets. But it's coming Saturday, August 12th, first night, 7 p.m., San Francisco Fringe Festival. San Francisco. I think there's still going to be a San Francisco. I mean, people, I think sometimes they overstate how bad San Francisco is getting or how bad it is. But like I said, I drove up 5th Street over the weekend, and I was just kind of astonished that Nordstrom's is closing and Westfield Mall is going to be shut down, or they're pulling out. That the Hiltons are, they're giving up the ghost too. But the San Francisco Fringe Festival is going to save it with Emil Amok. Lost NPR. I hope. Hey, welcome to the program. It's Emil Guillermo, Emil Amok to you. This is my Takeout, Emil Amok's Takeout. My takes on all things considerable. We talk about stuff. We talk about news. We talk about news as it involves, well, all of us, but in particular, the AAPI community. I call this the micro talk show of the AAPI and the AAXs. X, fill in your ethnicity, or maybe you're just an ALL. All the rest of you, you're all invited to listen to the show. Yeah, lots of news today. I'm going to be a little picky about what I choose to mull over today. We're still looking for an answer from the Supreme Court. Everyone just assumes, and I have said, I think the Supreme Court is going to vote against Harvard and vote for the Students for Fair Admissions, the white proxy group of Asian Americans sent out to battle affirmative action and to kill it. And I think the Supreme Court will probably rule to get rid of affirmative action or to change it in a way that it hasn't been changed in the last 50 years. So that's what we're talking about with affirmative action. And we're waiting, for the decision, and it hasn't come out. I mean, at the beginning of last week and the week before, as soon as we crossed into June, the feeling was it's coming right after Memorial Day, right? It's coming. And then it didn't come. It's coming. And then it didn't come. And this week, I don't think they're coming out with it today on Wednesday, but there have been in lieu of that, certainly there's no shortage of what I call affirmative mullings. People mulling over affirmative action. And I've participated in that myself. Was asked someone interviewed me for an article that's yet to come. Like I said, there's going to be nothing but mullings. But Jeannie Suk Gerson is a Harvard law professor, and she writes for the New Yorker. She came out with an article in the New Yorker that was kind of interesting. I'll just read the tease. And in a decision expected in the next few weeks, the Supreme Court is likely to declare it unlawful for colleges and universities to use race as a factor in admissions, overturning the decision in the landmark affirmative action case Gritter versus Bollinger from 2003. Ahead of that decision, Jeannie Suk Gerson reveals a fascinating discovery she made in the archives at the Library of Congress, which shows that a draft majority opinion in Gritter, circulated by Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, a conservative, had contained the stipulation that white and Asian applicants must be treated similarly in admissions decisions, which was later removed. Later removed. How did they find? Did they have that? What does that function in Word? The Word doc? Where you can see track changes. Anyway, she discovered this. And the question is asked, why did this phrase not make it into the final opinion? In considering the question, Gerson reckons with the fact that even as Asian Americans have been held up as model minorities in terms of academic achievement, they have also been discriminated against in admissions in favor of white students, an often unspoken reality that has long been, quote, inconvenient and uncomfortable for supporters of affirmative action. It's a discomfort that sometimes, Gerson notes, extends to liberals on the Supreme Court. Now, this has been Jeannie Gerson's, this has been her perspective, that Asian Americans have been, she feels that Asian Americans have been discriminated against. And I take a different view. I take a view that they haven't, and it's not a matter of, the people who believe that there's been some discrimination say that, well, I get the best test scores and I have the best grades. Certainly I deserve to get into Harvard. I should get in. If I don't get in, I'm discriminated against, right? No. Not when everyone, has equal, have those qualifications met. So race is just one factor. And then there were these other things that people consider into what makes a well-rounded candidate. Now, I don't know why exactly that whites have allied with Asian Americans, but I've always assumed that they've allied with Asian Americans because they want to use Asian Americans to show, hey, here is a quote unquote protected minority, and we're going to show that they've been discriminated against, so that we can end the practice of affirmative action. They couldn't find a black, they couldn't find an Hispanic student, but they found a member of the BIPOC community, or numbers. I don't know how large, a handful. They went trolling for victims who were Asian American, but they felt that they were discriminated against. That's who they went with, and now they're all the way up to the Supreme Court, and it looks like they may get, because of the 6-3 conservative court, they may overturn it. So I think it's interesting to note, Professor Gerson likes to talk about, well, why did this phrase, Asian Americans and whites need to be treated the same, why did that get excised from subsequent drafts from Sandra Day O'Connor's opinion? But I think that's kind of a red herring. I think, my opinion. Her bottom line, though, and it's different from whether or not there should be affirmative action or not. Her bottom line is kind of interesting. She points out that since the Students for Fair Admissions filed suit 9 years ago, the number of Asian Americans admitted to Harvard has significantly increased, reaching nearly 30% of admitted students this year. White students are less than half of the class. At Stanford, only 22% of admitted applicants last year were white. And in the University of California system, only 19% were. Beyond any, now that's pretty striking. What's it say? It says that the new minority in the block, white people. I didn't know it was that low. 22% of admitted applicants last year at Stanford, white. In the UC system, only 19% were. This is according to the New Yorker. I believe they're fact checkers. Beyond any decision of the court, the increasingly clear picture of white students as an underrepresented racial group whose majority status in the U.S. is fading, and of Asian Americans taking their place at the most selective schools, predicts even more racial resentment. Isn't it funny? Whites used Asian Americans as the ideal victim to debunk affirmative action, and now people who feel that there's some discrimination taking place, all this is a setup for white affirmative action. All this is a setup for, let's look at the reality. The reality is, oh my God, whites are underrepresented. And this is the bottom line for Jeannie Suk Gerson in her New Yorker article. It suggests that a white conservative alignment with Asian Americans as the victims of discrimination cannot endure for very long. Which, yeah, I think it was a fake alignment. I think it was a fake alliance. I think Asian Americans were used. I don't think it was a matter of some Asian Americans who were trolled by, the guy who created Students for Fair Admissions, Ed Blum. He put them out there to act as human shields to fight this battle, and it looks like they're going to win. They didn't win at the lower court. Harvard won at the lower court. I'm still hoping that the Supreme Court is going to throw it back to the lower court, or, throw it back to that court, or just adhere to that decision. But a 6-3 majority, conservative majority, could just say, nope, we're overturning the lower court. Harvard was wrong. Asians were discriminated against. And I think what Gerson is hinting at is that we see it happening at Stanford. We see it happening at UC, where whites are 22% of the admitted class, and at Stanford, 19 at UC. It's a little less than half now at Harvard, but if you let in more Asians, because the Supreme Court says they were discriminated against, what happens to whites? Whose place or who gets displaced by a rise in Asian applicants? Likely white. I mean, it's not going to be blacks. There's not be blacks, Asians taking blacks' place, Asians taking up Hispanics' place. Because you look at the numbers, Hispanic or Latinx and Asian and African American admissions are about the same. Only Asians have jumped up, extraordinarily high to near 30%. Whites are going to drop. And it's going to expose the fact that there was no alliance between Asians and whites. Some Asians, but for the most part, I think you're going to see what she says, the white conservative alignment with Asian Americans as the victims of discrimination cannot endure for very long. Like I said, I just don't think it had any legs anyway. So this is the interesting point. After they win, I'm talking about the Ed Blums, the white folks who started Students for Fair Admissions. Then what? Then what? You get rid of affirmative action, and how do you make sure that whites don't develop even more grievances? Naturally, because their numbers will be dwindling. How do you prop up those white numbers? I get more athletes, more legacies. Because, that was one of the arguments, that affirmative action isn't just among people of color, people, because based on race. Affirmative action took place because donors, athletes, legacies. And who are they? Majority white. So I'm looking forward to see what the court says about this case. Maybe a decision comes out by the end of this week. Chances are, they said when they took up the case that they'd have a decision by the summer recess. And so we have another week before the summer recess. And, of course, that's when, it's optimal for the court to dump something really controversial, and they're out of town. Sorry, on vacation, gone fishing. So it just leaves us with more time to mull things over. Not that we have any impact on what the decision, the decision is probably made. They're just holding it, waiting for the right time to drop it. But at least by talking about it now, by these affirmative mullings, we just get a chance to think about what the next step will be, because there will be a next step. There will be something else. I mean, it's not over. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, if they say we're all going to be colorblind, because that's sort of the bent that, okay, we're not going to we're not going to see race. We're not even going to be using race as was permissible. We're just going to admit people by blind draw of the qualified, some kind of line. Once again, we're thinking out loud here, but they're going to have to come up with something. Smart admissions officers. I have an idea. I had thought about a lottery, but many people have said that it's almost going to make admissions like a court of appeal. You know, like, you got to make your case. Why you're aggrieved, why you deserve admissions to an elite place. And maybe you deserve admissions because, boom, boom, for these points, for these reasons. I knew that when I applied to an elite college back in my day, I did so knowing that I'd have to write about my father. I knew I would have to write about his story. Now, not my, I mean, I had a pretty good story too. My grades were higher than my father's, who had no grades. He didn't go to school. No test scores. He just lived the life of a discriminated Filipino in America. That was my calling card. That's my badge. Look, I was discriminated against. I was the son of an original victim. I have legacy grievances. I should get in. I got in. I think you're going to see a lot more of that. Not that that hasn't happened. People haven't not written those kind of essays, but you're going to see more of them, because you're not going to be able to say in the application, hey, I'm a African American, I'm a Latinx, I'm a whatever, if they go colorblind. But you can't go colorblind in an essay. These are my words. And if they do, is there some kind of First Amendment thing here that could be at play? I mean, if they limit the right of your racial speech in an essay, I mean, these are colleges that get public monies. I'm just saying, we wait for this decision by the Supreme Court, and who knows just what, is it a Pandora's box? I don't want to put it all on Pandora, but a lot of concerns. Anyway, Jeannie Sook Gerson's column in the New Yorker, like I said, everyone's just waiting for the Supreme Court. And in the meantime, out come these affirmative mullings. That was one of them. So far, I've talked about another one. There was one in the Politico last Friday that, if you missed it, it's interesting. Professor Dan Gonzalez and I talked about it on episode 540 or 539. It's interesting because things changed with affirmative action, and now they're going to change again. And when affirmative action went to a kind of a diversity stance, and now it's going to be colorblind. So who knows how we're going to get the kind of equity we want, not just in college admissions, in anything, because that if the Supreme Court says hey, we're not going to have affirmative action in college admissions. You know, it's going to be a point brought up in every public situation, public employment, public contracting, you name it. So we have our affirmative mullings to consider what will happen in the future. All right, more. We're going to talk about Vincent Chin also today, of course, because this is Vincent Chin day 3. And I want to talk about that in a second. Just go over some of the things I've written in the past about his death, what it means. The beating of Vincent Chin was on June 19th, 1982. And we talked about that. Talked about the Juneteenth for Vincent Chin. He got clobbered by Ronald Ebens with a baseball bat. Sent him to a hospital for 5 days. The 19th, the 20th, the 21st, the 22nd, the 23rd. They pulled the plug. The day of his death. But you got to go back to June 19th. So we'll talk about that. Because this is one of the 5 days. 5 days when we remember. Okay? But I do want to talk about this one bit of news that came up. You know, I have not been following Joe Biden's appearances out here in the San Francisco Bay Area, but he was in Kentfield last night, which is a well-to-do suburb in Marin County, fundraising. And Joe Biden made a comment about China's President Xi. And this is right after Secretary of State Tony Blinken is just kind of like smoothed over things with China. It was, for China watchers, it was the appropriate amount of diplomacy, where nothing happens but everything happens, right? Where everyone's ruffled feathers are smoothed over, and we now establish a baseline because the United States needs China, China needs the United States. It's better to not be enemies, even though we have bombs pointing at each other. It's better just to peacefully coexist. So what does Biden do on Tuesday night? He gets in front of this crowd. He talks about China. He calls President Xi a dictator. He says dictators, they don't like it when they don't know what's going on. He talks about the weather balloon that Joe Biden, he's not exactly beating his breast, but he's saying, hey, I chopped down the cherry tree. Yeah, I cut it down. And, here's what Xi doesn't like. He doesn't like the fact that he didn't know that there were these boxcars of espionage stuff in the weather balloon. Had no clue. And it was almost like rubbing it in, a very anti-diplomatic move after Secretary Blinken spent all of last weekend trying to smooth things over with Xi. And now, here's Biden saying, hey, Xi's a dictator, and what do you know? This dictator doesn't know jack. Not exactly the most diplomatic thing. The only thing I can think of is that he was trying to impress Asian Americans who may have been in the audience in Kentfield, giving large sums of money. I think, I don't know why he would say what he said about President Xi unless he wanted to say to his supporters there that, we believe in this one China policy, and, we're not going to talk about Taiwan, wink, wink, but, he's a dictator, and, we're for democracy. And I don't know why Biden does what he does. I'm not in control of Biden. But these are kind of diplomatic ripples that will be felt from Kentfield, California, in Marin County, all the way out, well, around the world. And the only thing I could think of, the reason why Biden did it was just because maybe there were some Asian Americans there. Pro-Taiwanese Asian Americans. Anti-dictator type Asian Americans who wanted a little something extra from Biden. Let them feel like they're on the inside. And so Biden leaves, he left about an hour ago, I believe, from the Bay Area, heads to Washington where he meets with Modi, right? Prime Minister Modi of India. And who knows what he's going to say to Modi. I mean, Modi has had his ups and downs. The Washington Post writes, Modi's White House visit tests Biden's democracy versus autocracy pitch. Human rights groups are increasingly concerned about Hindu nationalism and democratic erosion in India. I'm just going to read the first two graphs of the Post story. Denied a U.S. visa in 2005 over deadly religious riots in his home state, Prime Minister Narendra Modi comes to Washington on Wednesday for a state visit that will highlight his change in fortune and glowing global clout, even as concerns about human rights and democratic erosion in India are intensifying across the nation he now leads. For the man rolling out the red carpet for him, President Biden, the visit underscores both the promise of strengthening ties with the world's most populous nation and the peril of positioning his presidency as a pivotal force in the global battle between autocracy and democracy. With Modi leading the world's largest democracy while overseeing trends that human rights groups say undermine democratic principles, Biden's decision to host a state visit risks undermining one of his key campaign messages against Donald Trump in 2020. India is emerging as an increasingly vital player in a region the United States has prioritized in its foreign policy, a potential bulwark against China, an increasingly powerful actor in sectors including technology, defense, and the arts. But the country's tilt toward illiberalism is at odds with the kind of message Biden has embraced during his presidency about the importance of proving that democracy is a preferable model to the more autocratic principles espoused by such foes as China and Russia. So here you have it. Biden leaves China after he tweaks the dictator, President Xi in China, heads to Washington where he meets with Modi later on today. Modi, who leads the largest Asian democracy, has seen his fates change from being more autocratic to more, he's moving slightly to the left, but he is still a strong man. And here's Biden. What's Biden going to say to Modi? Biden needs Modi to keep China off balance, to keep Russia off balance. And where are Indian Americans? And where are Chinese Americans in this mix? I think, all of these different factors come into play here. And they all represent different audiences. But if you're Asian American, the dictator comments about President Xi, well, if you're Asian American Chinese, pro-Taiwan, you're pleased by that. You're saying, yeah, Biden, he's our guy. If you're Asian Indian, South Asian, which, by the way, are among the biggest donors of the Democratic Party. And of course, you have a South Asian vice president. Or do you stand on Modi? You're probably with the human rights group saying, Modi? What's Modi? You want to make him more liberal. And I think the only reason why it's worth bringing up is because you look at the top three Asian American groups right now: Chinese, India, Philippines. And really, the relationship of the leader of your homeland to our president in our country determines your fate and your importance as a group in this country. So when Biden tweaks Xi, Chinese Americans have leverage. When Biden has a state visit with Modi, Indian Americans, they're up high. Number three, the Filipinos. Well, There Lies Love, the musical featuring a story about Imelda Marcos, that's on Broadway. I guess for us, that's about par. The Philippines is still important as a kind of launching pad. It's always been a defense stop, in Asia. That's the importance. Clark, Subic, the whole thing, right? And now, over the last 6 months, the Philippines has been cozying up to the United States because Philippines needs the United States. I know the nationalists, I think the Filipinos should be Filipinos, but when it comes to world powers, and you got China trying to take away land, the South China Seas, the West Philippine Sea, these are the diplomatic moves that are taking place, or these are the moves, international global moves taking place. And believe me, don't think for a second that it doesn't impact the standing of Chinese Americans, Indian Americans, and Filipino Americans here. It defines our importance. It really does. And I'm just, I'm interested to see what happens with Modi tonight. After Biden tweaks President Xi last night in the Bay Area, he goes with Modi. What's he going to do with Modi? What's he going to say? And Modi, right, like I said, he's into the tech thing, just like China. Biden needs one to counteract the other, keep them all in balance. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with Modi tonight. State dinner. All right, Vincent Chin. Like I said, when they started talking about Juneteenth 3 years ago, it just struck me as ironic. June 19th, 1982. That's when Vincent Chin, who was 27 at the time, was with his friends at a bachelor party, mistaken for being Japanese by two white auto workers, Ronald Ebens and his stepson, Michael Nitz. They were at a Detroit strip club. And Ebens told me Chin sucker punched him. The fight was taken outside, but then broken up. It would have ended right there, but Ebens and Nitz pursued Chin by car. They hunted them down. They found Chin and his friends at a nearby McDonald's. And in the parking lot, Ebens brutally beat Chin with a baseball bat. Those are essential Asian American facts that we consider today, the 41st year, right? 41st year after that event. Chin was comatose for 4 days and pronounced dead on June 23rd. For that crime, Ebens and Nitz, his accomplice, were allowed to plea bargain. They pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, were sentenced to 3 years probation and fined a grand total of $3,720. There was no prison time for the murderers of Vincent Chin. Once again, essential facts. They were allowed to plead guilty to second-degree murder, and they got probation for the murder of Vincent Chin. The Asian American community, of course, was outraged, which led to a federal civil rights prosecution against Ebens and Nitz. Ebens was found guilty on one charge and sentenced to 25 years in prison. He appealed to the Sixth Circuit, and a second federal trial was moved from Detroit to Cincinnati. Ebens was acquitted by a Cincinnati jury that found no racial motivation in the killing of Chin. And that's where the story has been the last 41 years. And of course, you can't have another trial. That would be double jeopardy. So the perps go free. And Asian Americans can still be victims of extremely violent hate crimes. Like Srinivas Kuchibotla, an Asian Indian mistaken for a Muslim. And that was just in 2017 in Olathe, Kansas. Kuchibotla allegedly killed by a white gunman who yelled, "Get out of my country." It happened, these kind of violent crimes happen over the pandemic. 2020 to 2022. The number of instances of violence from minor to major through the roof. I talked to Helen Zia back in 2017. She's the trustee of the Chin estate. She said the Chin family was awarded a $2 million judgment in civil litigation against Ebens back in the 80s. Continues to monitor Ebens, who's retired in Nevada. The judgment has been continued, Zia told me. She said that with interest and penalties, the judgment could be in excess of $8 million, but Ebens has not paid a dime. Zia said she was philosophical about the recovery. This was 6 years ago. The guy did what he did. He's a killer. He got away with murder. But the things that need to be done on behalf of the community don't depend on him or his death. It will bring closure, but it doesn't mean hate crimes have ended. Besides being the trustee of the estate, Zia was right there in the thick of the Chin case in Detroit. A journalist with some legal training, she wrote for the daily newspaper there, but refrained from writing about the case so she could be one of the founders of American Citizens for Justice, the group formed to fight for Chin. It was just a handful of Asian American lawyers and activists. At that time, there were few Asian Americans in the law or in journalism, and there was no one with the expertise to do a federal hate crime case. When I talked to Zia, some 35 years after the fact, she said what strikes her the most are the things people don't bring up about the case. The human stuff, like the late Lily Chin, Vincent's adoptive mom. She died, there's a quote, she died feeling that if she hadn't adopted him, he'd be alive, Zia told me. It's sad to me to think about it that way. Vincent Chin was adopted to imagine that the late Lily Chin felt bad because she chose someone, brought him to America, and then he lived his life with her. He died. But the human stuff also includes the human opposition to the case within the community and the backlash that existed at the time. Quote, we had civil rights people who said, we'll support you because Vincent Chin was Chinese and thought to be Japanese. But if he were Japanese, we won't support because he would have deserved it, Zia said. I said, what? Are you kidding? The Michigan ACLU and the Michigan National Lawyers Guild strongly opposed the civil rights investigation because Asian Americans are not protected by federal civil rights law. That was something we had to argue. Fortunately, the national offices of those legal groups prevailed and forced the state chapters to comply. Now that's something that would be a remarkable change in just the 41 years now looking back, 1982, that kind of reaction. Think about that. Here's more of what Helen told me. Here were some of the most liberal activist attorneys saying Asian Americans shouldn't be included under the civil rights law. Vincent was an immigrant. We had to establish he was a citizen with the implication there might not have been a civil rights investigation if he had not been naturalized. All of this stuff, these were hurdles we had to overcome with major impacts today. Can you imagine if the Reagan White House had followed the National Lawyers Guild's Michigan chapter and the ACLU of Michigan and said, why should we look expansively at civil rights? We shouldn't include immigrants and Asian Americans. And at that time, that would include Latinos too, because at that time, if you are not black or white, what do you have to do with race? Those are the things people would say to us. That is kind of stunning that Helen told me that in 2017. But it shows you how race has evolved. Was it moral and ethical right, or was it the rise in demographics? But I admit, because when I started writing my columns for first Asian Week and then moved over to ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, the idea that race could be seen as anything other than black or white, that was the predominant black-white paradigm. It was not Latino, it was not Asian, it was not all-inclusive until much later in the game. 1982, Vincent Chin, right? It was still black-white paradigm. Zia said after 35 years, when I talked to her, a quick telling of the Chin case rarely discusses just how difficult it was to fight for justice. But she said those are the enduring lessons of the Vincent Chin case, because it has contributed to a modern sense of social justice for every American. Every immigrant, Latinos, every American, Zia said. Hate crime protection laws now also include perceived gender and disability. It was the Vincent Chin case when we had to argue civil rights was more than black and white. Zia said the case was also more difficult because it was during a pre-digital, non-computer payphone age. Communication occurred slowly, but the case was also slow because Asian Americans were a micro community. We're over 23 million now. Now we feel empowered. In 1980, Asian Americans were just 3.7 million nationwide. And most were timid, non-boat rockers, I call them. said, "See it to me." In the Vincent Chin case, people were incredibly reluctant to become involved. They had never gotten involved before. And I think that's what gets lost in the retelling of the story. Exclusion didn't end till about 1950. And so what that meant was Asian Americans of every kind, from Chinese to Filipinos, everybody were pretty much totally disenfranchised till the mid 20th century. So when Vincent Chin was killed in 1982, the communities had, I think of it as stunted growth. There weren't people running for office. If there were, it was a minuscule number. There weren't people standing up. We didn't have advocacy organizations, except for ALDEF in New York and Asian Law Caucus in California, with no pan-Asian advocacy groups in between. A right to justice and a community sense of empowerment was a difficult thing to imagine for many Asian Americans. Not only did we not have it, Zia said, people didn't even recognize it was something we could have. The idea we all came together with the Vincent Chin case and sang Kumbaya and took over and went to the Reagan White House and the Department of Justice and got all these things to happen, that's mythology. And I think it's a disservice to the next generation to think this. So that's Helen Zia and her take. I was surprised, when I've seen subsequent things with Helen. She was an auto worker before she was a journalist, and so those are part of the mullings, part of the Vincent Chin mullings. Think about that. This is day 3, right? The 21st. So we start with the 19th, the 20th, the 21st. More reflections tomorrow, the 22nd, and the 23rd. Because, as I've said, this is a period for reflection. I'm going over things that I've read or things that I've written about the Vincent Chin case, updating when necessary. Unfortunately, there is no update. Ronald Liebens is still out there, still using the bankruptcy laws to protect himself from paying a dime to the Chin estate. That's always the joke about civil cases. Liebens won the criminal case. Can't be brought up because of double jeopardy again. But the civil case, he lost. And now the challenge is to collect. And it's been impossible. So no justice for Lily Chin, the late Lily Chin, her estate. Vincent Chin is dead. The killers go free. Think about that. In this, the 41st year of that period between June 19th and the 23rd, when Vincent Chin was in a coma. And then on the 23rd, he did not awaken, but the Asian American community did. All right, that's going to do it for today. I'm here Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific Live. We do this. We talk about the news. We talk about things in the traditional talk radio sense. Take a news story, think about it from an Asian American perspective, of course. And let me close by saying August 12th, save the date, doing my Emil Amok's Takeout, my takes on all things considerable. You know, I like to do this. I'm a broadcaster, so I like to play radio here on the web for you. And today's audio should be better than yesterday's. I mean, there was a switch I didn't see. It all sounds good coming out of my headphones, but if I don't press a switch, it gets routed the wrong way. I apologize. I apologize for the sound yesterday, but here we're okay. And also our internet is okay. Hallelujah. So you can catch this show replayed on amok.com. Also on Twitter, if you're on Twitter, at Emil Amok. On YouTube, at Emil Amok1. On Facebook, on my name, Emil Guillermo Media. Facebook, catch it there. Use your finger and roll it back. Catch it all. You know, I like to meditate. It's always about self-love. Always about self-love. Share it first with others. And then it comes back twofold, threefold. However many folds you want. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Emil Guillermo here. Till next time. Mahal.